There's an image that you have in the book where you show this two by two here of anti-meme, super meme, dormant, and meme. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, I love a good two by two. They're they're hard to resist, but they're yeah useful ways of thinking about stuff. So I was trying to sort of map out the difference between memes and anti-memes, and land on these two dimensions of whether an idea is easily transmitted, and then also how impactful is that idea. And so memes are highly transmissible, but each individual meme is not really that impactful or consequential. I think that's why they spread so easily. So mimetic behavior or mimetic ecosystems in general, like more broadly, are impactful, but each individual meme, you send an article or a link to a friend and you kind of like forget about it afterwards. If we think about memes outside of an internet context, if you think about shaking someone's hand or social norms, aphorisms, things like that. Like the reason that they're so easily transmitted is because you just don't really have to think about it. Anti-memes are the opposite of this, where they are highly consequential either to yourself or to your community or your network. And that's why they don't spread that easily. So taboos being an example of this, where you don't say the taboo thing out loud because if you did, there might be negative consequences for yourself, or it might totally upend your community. So that's why we don't share anti-memes. And then there's two other sort of versions of this. I'll start with the maybe less compelling one is just sort of dormant ideas. Um, so these things are not anti-memes. It's anything that doesn't spread that easily, in part just because it's not that particularly consequential or interesting. I think that can change over time. Like sometimes ideas become more or less consequential depending on their environment, but in the moment they're sort of dormant. So yeah, random data set, random noise, stuff like that. But then there's this other class of memes that I think of as maybe like a mutant strain of meme called a super meme. And these are highly transmissible and highly impactful. And I think it's a fairly narrow class of things that are often apocalyptic, maybe in nature. So we think about like the climate crisis, population decline, existential risk from AI. They have this quality where they speak to our personal values, so they feel very urgent to spread. There's often some perceived danger that is kind of like medium term away. So, it's not next year, it's not 100 years from now, it's like 30-ish years from now, just enough to make you worried. And they all kind of share this sort of quality. And there's probably like an entire book that could just be written about super memes. And they get like their own sort of treatment in the book. But I think of sort of like war as maybe the original super meme. And then we had, everyone is rallying around this cause and everyone is expected to sort of lay down what they're doing and just focus on this one crisis. And then that kind of broke apart a little bit into culture wars. And now we have even more finely grained super memes that, it's a very specific topic like population decline, and that can marshal its own universe of attention, funding, resources, talent that is just sort of like focused on solving this one thing. And so, if I think there's some sort of like human instinct to want to lay down your life for a cause of some sort, right? And right now you kind of have like a growing menu of super memes to do that with.
Do you, I know you're not really gonna like this question, but I'm thinking just, but like, are memes, are they alive? Like I'm like listening to the way that you talk about them, and you are giving them almost a self-determination, or maybe that's too strong. But how do you have you thought about that? How do you think about the relationship to our minds exactly with memes or anti-memes?
I think they are alive in the way that bacteria or viruses are alive. I do think, yeah, I mean, there's probably another essay that could turn into a book or something about treating ideas as live viruses that infect us or something. And yeah, I think I mean it almost literally. I don't give nearly as much credence to, um, the idea of like a great man or a great founder or something, that the idea that's an individual is sort of imposing their will on the universe. I think it's really that they get infected by an idea, and then that idea is we're sort of like the hosts for it, and it's expressing itself through us. But really, I think ideas kind of run the world, and especially if we think about it in this context of like dormant ideas or knowledge, and sometimes they're kind of just laying low, and then sometimes they kind of have this crop or outbreak, and they're just infecting and taking over everyone's brains, and yeah, I think there's just like a very it helps me understand the world in a much better, I think, than thinking about like sort of like people imposing their will on things.
Fully agree. Alan Moore's idea of the idea space of like our minds live in a neighborhood and like ideas knock on our door, and we can open or not open, but like ideas originate in another place and come to us. But in that world, like what is an anti-meme like? What is it? It's not knocking on the door, or like what is where how are they personified in that universe?
Um, Probably need to workshop this a little bit. I did think
Yeah.
about I was talking to someone about this about if memes are kind of like I was thinking about norovirus because norovirus swept through our household in January. And so it's like norovirus this thing just feels like totally awful, totally takes over, but then it kind of like whoosh, it's like out of your body in like, 2 days, and you're like, I don't even know what that was. And you kind of go on with your life. And anti-memes are probably something more like a parasite or something that is like lodged into your body for a really, really long time. It's like, what's that feline one, the toxoplasmosis or something, something like that, where it's just like it's governing your behavior. You don't even realize it's governing your behavior. And then at some point, maybe you'll like discover that it's there and then you'll try to like get it out or something. And then yeah, once you see it, then you can't unsee it. But I think of an ant to me maybe a little bit closer to that than the flashy stomach bug that kind of flows right through you.
Yeah, just like a giant cyst that gets removed from your body and shows up on Reddit as like some record.
Disgusting.
Um, so there's a big step from like being inspired by the Risen Antimemetics division to like I'm gonna write something about this or I want to explore this. Like what what took you over that hump and what made this start as like a project that has really been fully played out?
Definitely started just as like I'm just gonna collect some notes. So after I read There Is No Antimemetics Division, I just opened a little markdown file on my desktop as one does and just started, putting little thoughts and bits and ideas in there. I had a bunch of other ideas I think I'd sort of been workshopping and thinking about that were sort of making their way into this book and this project, but I didn't know what it was. And, you know, I think at that stage it's hard to know whether you're actually going to do anything with it or not. This happens, frankly, like a lot with different ideas. And then sometimes I kind of sit down to try to write it. And I'm like, actually, this kind of sucks. I'm not going to write it. And then I kind of let it out of my brain. But with this one, I did sit down that was, yeah, maybe like 2 years of doing that. And I would like sit down, I would try to turn it into a draft. And I would kind of get, yeah, partway through it and it just kind of get stuck and then just feel like I don't really, this is just so abstract. I don't really know what to do with it. There are too many different framings I can take. And so I would just leave that on my desktop and not really think about it. Um, the reason it turned into a book is because of Dark Forest Collective. Because I mean, I definitely would not have written this book without you guys. And so, I'd seen that Dark Forest Collective had, so basically, like Yancey had, written this essay. A couple other people had written other key foundational essays about to complement it, and then they formed this collective, Dark Forest Collective. And then they began sort of like publishing on their own as their own independent label. And so you guys had just released this anthology. Um, yes, that one. And I had ordered a copy of that. I had gone to a little roundtable just like this. And soon after that, I think Yancey had kind of put out a call for we want to publish more things. And that's when I'd reached out and thought, well, I have this thing that could kind of fit. I'm not really sure. Maybe we just talk about it. And that was the first time you and I had met face to face and just, on a Zoom call and talked about it. And I was sort of like, I'm just gonna make it and see what happens. So I definitely had just thought of it as a fun summer project last summer and just figured we'll just see what happens. But I think like having just feeling like there was a group of people that were interested in the same things as me made it feel easier to kind of it gave me a reason to want to do it. Otherwise, I think I was just sort of getting lost in my own head for I think a topic like this, it's easy to just sort of go in circles around it by yourself and not really know what to do with it. So, yeah, very grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean that I you're right. I mean, it was a roundtable. Could might have been around almost this exact time. I think it was May last year.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and I couldn't believe when you reached out to say, hey, you were thinking about something because you've always been on my like most admired board, and it's like, whoa, Nadia one, whoa, it was really exciting. Um, and maybe talking about the like way we decided to work together is interesting. Of I've never been a publisher or a book editor before. I've had an editor. I've been published by a professional publisher before. Had a good experience. And but it was interesting to imagine actually doing that directly together. But I feel like a lot of it came from just having a monthly phone call. And that seemed like a lot of the accountability that helped.
Yeah, definitely. It helped to have a real person to, I mean, writing can get very lonely. It could feel very solitary, and just having someone that I knew I would be talking to every month about this stuff who was actively reading drafts. I used to be very lone wolf about my writing and very, I don't want anyone to read drafts. I'm just gonna like publish it as it is, and it's the purest thing that came out of my brain or something. I don't know. And now I think I've really come around in recent years, and I think reflected in how we work together. Of it's actually really nice to have someone else to bounce ideas off of, as long as you trust that person to be, you know, to be aligned with how you're thinking. I think that is where a lot of the friction happens with the writer-editor relationship is with someone that maybe doesn't fully understand what you're trying to do, and then it just becomes this battle to, for dominance of ideas. Whereas I knew that, you're one of the very few people in the world that would like really, really get what I was trying to do. Not just the topic, but also just stylistically. I felt like we had similar just ways of seeing the world, so it felt right. Um, yeah, I think I have a bunch of emergent thoughts on writer-editor relationships that's, I think, really congealed for me after working with you and Dark Forest Collective. Because now I've published two books that were both with independent presses. The first one was with Straight Press, and this one was with you guys. Um, and I think, there's this history that people talk about of writers working with editors where they have these very close relationships and it feels really generative. And, these editors shape writers' books as much as the authors do themselves. And you hear these stories about the great, literary names of the past, and you're just sort of like, that is not reflected at all in a lot of the experiences I hear from my friends today who are publishing books. And why is that? And I think a lot of it just comes down to a scale issue. So I think about this in parallel with what you see happening in healthcare right now. So if your primary care physicians are used to be maybe you have this model of like a village doctor or a town doctor or something, or even just like a family doctor, someone who's, serving the needs of everyone in your family, and they're kind of following your trajectory over time. And you feel like this one person has a lot of context for who you are, and, the health stuff you might be dealing with. And now it seems like a lot of the primary care physician relationship is just sort of like very one to many, very at scale. And you just like, they're just, and it's not their fault. There's so many patients they need to serve that it's just not possible to have that kind of context anymore. And so what's happening now is a lot of people are moving towards concierge-based medical care where they pay a subscription fee and then they get a little bit more of that personalized relationship that they used to. And I think there's something like that happening with independent publishing, or maybe independent publishing is maybe serving a little bit of that need in relation to traditional publishing, where there are definitely a lot of benefits to traditional publishing for the right topic, the right audience, the right sort of distribution you're trying to get. But I think it's a privilege to be able to work with a label that has the audience and a thesis and a point of view that reflects the universe that I am trying to operate in, right? So with Straight Press, it was you know, feeling like they were at this intersection of like economics and software developers, and that felt like the right place to talk about the future of open source software. And then with you guys, with Dark Forest Collective, it just felt like the right place to talk about these maybe like confusing and still ill-formed in my mind ideas around anti-memes, anti-memetics. But it
Jackie and
feels like
generative.
yes, yes, but emphasis on generative. Yeah, it felt like, in each case, these presses have their own audience, people who had collected the first book that you guys had put out, who were clearly then interested in, I knew they would be interested in this kind of topic. So it felt like, okay, I get to speak to this sort of like built-in audience. I feel like, for big five publishers, like the imprints, as far as I can tell, don't really have that sort of fan base or relationship or whatever in the same sort of way that you see like with Straight Press. I was so surprised at how many people just wanted to buy a Straight Press book. They may have never
Mhm.
heard of me, but they were just like that means something to people, right? And yeah, so I think that's just a really nice thing to be able to work with a label that's or with an editor or a publisher that it just feels like the right people for that right topic. So it's yeah, maybe similar to that sort of like concierge model with healthcare.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say like being your editor publisher, I thought about that role, and I had a great editor at Viking Books who like cared for me and who was really supportive in my process of my writing my first book. And I really thought like I want to do what Emily did for me for someone else. And I like had a doc where I wrote at the top like my job is to help Nadia, and almost would like role play going into our conversations of just thinking you're the editor here to help the author, and like to not try to generate ideas but just to like ask you questions the way that I think I've had people be helpful for me. It's hard to be told what to do, but being asked what you think can actually be quite helpful. But like I will say everything that you showed was always incredible. And I think there's only one chapter ever that I was like, I don't know about this. And maybe we'll even talk about that later. Maybe we will. Um, but just, I was just so excited reading it live each month. I mean, I felt like I'm getting like a private Nadia drop here. And just to see the ideas take shape was, I felt very lucky and super fun. Um, were you so like the the wider context has changed a lot during the time you wrote it versus now, where in the book you talk about like Curtis Yarvin being someone who goes from, cannot be mentioned to becoming on the edge to now he's like even more like the way you write about him in this book doesn't even represent the degree to which maybe his stature or visibility has grown. Um, But yeah, how did you feel sort of trying to write about more taboo areas, politically taboo areas, socially taboo areas, and just, taboos in general?
Yeah, there were a few aspects of the book that I think evolved even since publishing. Curtis is definitely one of them. I think also just like a couple of the group chat pieces that came out this year from The Atlantic and from Semaphore. Um, yeah, I mean, so with the group chat stuff, one of the things I talk about in the book is how journalists can't really write about group chats because they're not invited to them, and if they were invited, they would keep their mouths shut about what is actually going on inside them. And I do have a little bit of this of like the piece in New Yorker about anti-memetics said that this is no longer true this year. I still think it is true because in the case of The Atlantic, the journalist had, accidentally been added to a group chat that then enabled him to sort of perceive what was going on. And then the semaphore piece, Ben says, I was not, he says he was not actually part of any of these chats. He's just sort of repeating what other people had shared with him. And so reporting it still from the outside. So I still think there's something very self-censoring about group chats where we can't actually talk about yeah, what goes on inside them, and that's very different from the mimetic sort of mining of there's an entire body of clickbait type articles that are just written off of based on mining tweets, Reddit, whatever. It's all like super highly public, and so just provides this endless fodder for people to write about it. And group chats, you kind of only know your own little universe about it, or you know what other people tell you. So I still think some of that stuff holds. And in the case of Curtis, yeah, I stopped. I dedicate like a pretty big chunk of the chapter about taboos to the story of Curtis's rise. Um, and I stop it around I think when he goes on Tucker Carlson a few years back, and I didn't include him getting profiled in New York Times, which I think was the beginning of this year. And I knew I could have maybe snuck that in, but I didn't want to be super reactive. It's a book, it's not a magazine piece. And then since then, I think this year it's with the new administration, everything, he's just like continued to have more and more just become this topic of fascination for journalists. There's just the New Yorker profile about him as well. Um, Most of the coverage I've seen about Curtis has been, it feels like it's someone coming to his work or his reputation or his relevance maybe like later down the line and then trying to unwind how did we get here of you know there's this guy who seems like a monarchist fascist whatever who's influencing the government, and who is he really? I wanted to tell the story, and I think I do in anti-memetics, about my personal relationship to coming across his work. And I don't even really get into the extent to which I felt that Yarvin as an entity in sort of like 2017 to 2019-ish influenced a lot of how I was thinking about the internet, in the same way that, reading Quantum's book also did influence me, and spending time with Urbit folks and just, yeah, sort of immersing myself in a bit of that universe. But I wanted to tell it a little bit from like a personal side of, here's how I ended up stumbling across this work, and then discovering that everyone else I knew was also quietly reading his work, and no one was really talking about it unless they were asked. And how was that sort of shaping that time? And I don't even really, I made an explicit decision not to really talk so much about, I don't really talk about his politics that much. I don't talk about some, his more like controversial assertions and claims, because to me, the story in the context of anti-memetics is much more about how did this person and his ideas go from being a, can't mention in public or you'll get fired kind of taboo, to now being widely celebrated. And so it's really more about the move of like, how do these ideas kind of spread through a network without being ever overtly referred to on Twitter or something like that.
I mean, the feeling I had, you still have reading the book, read it again just a couple weeks ago, is like you are showing, you're revealing a hidden world. There's something that like a whole dimension I hadn't perceived, and now you've shown me that it exists. And I wonder, like, what is lost when we don't know? When we shuffle all of these things into a corner where we don't see or think or look at them, like, what is it that we lose? What is the danger of that? What do we gain by like knowing that it's there?
It feels like it's just an entire ecosystem that it would be strange to not acknowledge exists. It'd be like not talking about biology or something. Um, I use this metaphor in the book of borrowing from China Miéville's City and the City, um, also an excellent sci-fi book you should read. But in the City and the City, there's these two cities that are physically, geographically on top of each other. So you're using all the same streets and whatever. But they're two separate cities, and the residents have just been trained from birth to unsee the other city and just only see their own city, even though they're in the same physical space. And I use that as a metaphor for talking about sort of like the mimetic city and the anti-mimetic city, which are also laid on top of each other. But the mimetic city gets all the attention because it's flashy and it's visible, and we can all sort of perceive the same things about it, and have some some version of like a shared truth about what it is we're looking at because we're all looking at the same things. Um, but then there's this entire other city or ecosystem on top of it that's the anti-mimetic one that we've sort of been trained to unsee in the same sort of way because we kind of learn we're socialized to not blurt out taboos, most of us anyway, when in polite company, or not to ask certain questions, not to talk about certain private aspects of your own life, private inquiries, things that wouldn't be, you shouldn't maybe be sharing with others. So we are also being sort of trained to unsee these things. And I wanted to take the mimetic layer off and say, okay, well, what's left? Like, what is this collection of things that are all anti-mimetic and that aren't visible, aren't perceived, or are really hard to hold on to? What does that city look like? Like, what are the laws that govern its behavior? What are the social norms? What are the dynamics between like how ideas are kind of moving through that system? Um, and so I don't know, there's so many things that we might have lost or not paid attention to and not noticing that that system is there or not acknowledging it. But I think it still governs our behavior anyway, whether we like it or not. And so we owe it to ourselves to try to, take a look at it and yeah, try to at least acknowledge its influence in our lives.
Are they are are anti-memes bad? Are they good? Should we not want them to happen? Is it better if there are no, is like no taboos good? And that means no anti, like, is there any sort of value judgment to be placed?
Yeah, you already know how I'm going to answer that,
Yeah, I know how you're
but
gonna answer.
reject the moral framing. No, I don't think they're good or bad. I think they just are. And that was really explicitly the approach I want to take in this book. I think it's also why like I couldn't have published this book a few years back. Like, Applied Divinity Studies saying that this is a not a book about cancel culture. It's a post-cancel culture book, right? Like we're in some kind of like post era where you can actually, I think, like talk about these things in a more not even neutral, but just like descriptive fashion. Um, so yeah, I mean, I make the argument in the book that even, I think taboos have their place sometimes, right? Like the reason why we don't share or acknowledge anti-memes is because they are so consequential. That's a real thing. Like we don't want to be constantly destabilizing our communities by, shouting crazy things into the atmosphere. And there's a reason why sometimes these more fibrous ideas just take time to process. So but it's like anything else where if there's too much suppression and we're not acknowledging any of these hard truths, that's bad. But if I also don't think we need to like force it all into the light either. So yeah, I think it's more important just to understand like how does this thing work? How does it govern our lives? And let's try to understand those dynamics and they can be applied in a lot of good or bad kind of situations.
Let's moralize this, Nadia. It's way more productive to moralize these decisions. I want to talk about one more sort of concept, and then we're going to open up to the questions. A lot of people are asking great things. Um, so um, the nature of the existence of dark forests, and the value of dark forests, and whether we should like or not like, um, or see them as good or bad. Uh, you have opinions on this. Why don't you share your opinions about, yeah, how you feel about a world of dark forests, and you talk about it in the book.
The dark forest landscape always felt more descriptive to me, which is, I think, I'm just sort of like, yes, this is a thing that started happening and is happening right where the our public feeds can often feel too hostile to put some of our most precious ideas out there, and so we save them for slightly more private or high context than trusted spaces. Um, Venkatesh's subsequent framing of the cozy web and as his sort of description of like what was going on. I am not the only curmudgeon here. He has also gone back and said, he kind of wishes he didn't call it cozy web because cozy implies something innately positive about it, right? Like we're all hunkered down in our cozy little circles with our friends, and that's like a nice stable way to be on the internet. Yes. And I think I share his concerns around what that really means on two fronts, and I discuss both of these in the book. Like one of them being that there's a false sense of security that comes from thinking that we have now retreated to the small group chats and we are somehow like safe in here. We're not in this era. It's not like we regressed back to Web 1.0 where we're all just like totally disconnected and there's nothing really connecting all these different disparate communities. I think like all these smaller newsletters, group chats, whatever, they're all still connected back to like some sort of main public feed, right? So what are we talking about in the group chats? We're talking about what's happening out there, right? A lot of the time. And so I compare this to COVID pods where it's you and your 10 friends, and you think if we just only hang out with each other, me and my 10 friends, then no one's going to get COVID. And in theory, there's a way that this works if you're really like, out in the countryside, not interacting with anyone else. If you're just, living in a city or something, you're still, people still interact with other people in the world. They still can pick up little bits of contagions and bring them back to your pod. You're not totally safe in there. And in fact, once something is introduced to that group, it can spread around really rapidly. It can mutate in all these strange ways. And so I reject the framing that being hunkered down or cozy or, in your isolate group chat is safe somehow. I think it can actually lead to ideas mutating and getting really strange really quickly and having, pretty big, pretty big consequences. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat.
So you don't think a future built around like your grandpa's email forwards as like a social organization structure is the way?
It's
Um,
possible. And then the other just sort of brief critique I have of it um, is just feeling uncomfortable with the idea of like, even if they were good, like, and we take this to its logical conclusion, what does that mean for the public commons? And I think it's funny because I feel like that makes me like old school in some way that still talk about like this notion of a public commons, but like I believe in it, whatever. And I think I know at least for myself, there's a lot of things I blog a lot less now in part because I feel like I just, I prefer kind of writing less often, but longer and deeper things. But partly also because now if I want to workshop half-formed ideas, I just workshop them with my group of friends or in group chats or whatever. Why put yourself out there and deal with being misinterpreted or people, this lack of context and it feels it just feels like so much work compared to just dumping an idea into WhatsApp or whatever. And I know that's true for a lot of other people, but yeah, if you take this to its logical conclusion, you just have people sort of, you know, um, saving the best ideas for behind gates, where it's like these big gated communities, right? And there's nothing left for the commons except for the only people that are sharing things in public are people who are actively craving the attention and the rewards of this like mimetic city. And so, all the more thoughtful, nuanced stuff is behind bars and all the just sort of mimetic slop is like flowing through the streets. And I think that's a bad way of being. And that I think to go back to, the very beginning of this conversation, that was what I was trying to kind of work out for myself in this book, was feeling like I want to hunker down, but hunkering down doesn't feel like a great idea long term either. And I think even the fact of publishing this book was forcing myself to get these ideas off my desktop and just like put them out there, even though, you don't really know how people are going to respond to it or whatever. But I think that's a good thing to force myself to do. And yeah, hopefully encourage other people to do the same.
so interesting. I mean, is it like, the public did equal social media for a while. Basically, that was the public, that was the commons, was social media channels. And then that stopped for a variety of reasons, partially for a variety of reasons. Um, and the commons is still the internet at large, but it's like so that there is, we're supposed to believe that X is the town square or whatever. And it's kind of like, is this the internet maturing and the first 10 years was an aberration, in the same way as like liberal democracy in the 20th century, is that an aberration in history or was that a new normal? Those are things that are not clear right now. Um, but yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, I would love to go back to um, some of these questions that were mentioned. In particular, I wanted to start with the one about someone mentioning the connection between conspiracies and anti-memes. And I wonder if you spent time thinking about conspiracies at all. Uh, the book doesn't explicitly talk about conspiracies, I don't
Yeah.
think.
I think I touched on it super briefly. There's probably a lot more to unpack here. Conspiracies come up in the book when it's talking about um, just how, and this has actually been a question that a lot of people have brought up to me since the book has now partially come out and people have read it as well, of, is anti-mimetic a quality of the idea itself or the network that it's situated in? Um, and are ideas only anti-mimetic depending on who is actually receiving it, right? Um, and so in the context of conspiracies, the idea that for a certain idea can spread very rapidly in a network of people that are primed to want to believe, let's say, a conspiracy. Um, and but then like stop short, not able to make the jump to other perhaps more skeptical or higher immunity networks. And so yeah, I mean, I guess maybe similar to Boo's, like what makes something a conspiracy or not is whether it can kind of prove itself in that arena, right? Whether it can escape the context of these smaller networks that are really primed and open to understanding or accepting a conspiracy. If they never make it out of there, it kind of stays a conspiracy. Some conspiracies turn out to be true, and those are the ones that maybe like make the leap to a wider audience.
Yeah, so it's like all conspiracies are default anti-mimetic because they're likely taboo, because it's not a conventional wisdom, maybe, and some make a jump if you get a cabinet appointment.
Yeah,
I think that's how it
and
works these days.
similar dynamics too of um, yeah, they're just like they're highly consequential if they're true, which keeps them suppressed for a while.
So Julian asked an interesting question about are we limiting human agency at all with how we're thinking about this? Like, are we giving the ideas more power than we're giving ourselves to discern? How do you think about like our where we ourselves situate as transmitters or whatever, however we engage?
Hey, Jillian, I saw your question in the chat. I also just wanted to give you a shout out that I'm reading your book right now. So um, uh, it's on my nightstand right now. Yeah, I don't know. I think my default answer to this question is that I, yeah, I don't think, oh, I'm reading Connect. Um, it's about a mother and her son. It's very lovely so far. Um, yeah, I think I default to we are less agentic than it seems in terms of which ideas take hold of us. Maybe it's about, you know, the direction in which we are pointing. I don't think we have that much control over. Um, I know that sounds kind of depressing. I don't, and I want it to not sound depressing, but uh, I do believe there's some sort of maybe like natural selection sensation here of like trying to find ways to make this not sound cheesy or depressing, but if you like really like I know that I can at least really feel when I'm working on the right idea or not. And sometimes I ignore that feeling and I work on the wrong idea for a while. Um, and then in retrospect, I can say like I never really felt it, like it just wasn't really right. Um, and when there's something that just sort of like infects me, like I just go to town on it, and sometimes it's really random. Like I had zero background in open source software. Like I just like it just felt like something clicked. Right now I'm looking at all this stuff around advanced meditation. Like I had no background in meditation, but just like something like the idea just infected me, and then I had to like express it as long as it needs to be expressed. Um, and so I can override it in the sense that I can choose to work on something that is maybe not the right feeling or the right click or whatever. But that would be that whenever I do that, it never really actually works out that great, at least in my experience. And so I think there's some like natural, I don't know, I see it as sort of liberating where it's like my body already kind of knows what it's supposed to work on, and I just kind of need to listen to it better. And even like with writing this book, there were so many times leading up where I was just sort of like, this is stupid, and like, why am I writing this thing? Like, I don't know. That happens a lot with things that I write, and it feels like and in the end, then I'm always glad that I did it. So yeah, I don't know. There's still room for us to make our own choices but I think there's actually maybe just a lot of, I don't know if wisdom is the right word, but just a sort of natural order to things and just letting the thing take you over and giving yourself up to it. I don't know.
Love that. What a beautiful response. And I'm thinking about something that Adam Curtis said to me in a interview I did with him once about how right now we're consumed with a very limited notion of freedom, which is I as the individual am free to do whatever I want to do. But there's another type of freedom that says the freedom of giving yourself up to something larger than you. And like that is a
Hmm.
different type of freedom. And I feel like that's kind of what you were talking about. Um, I like this question from Patricia. Patricia asks, can religious organizations throughout history be seen as the original group chat? Small protected space where ideas are shared safely. Um, yeah, love to hear you talk about that.
Tempting. Yeah, probably different in the sense of group. I think group chats and their relevance today are situated in this relevance of they're they're like a smaller hideaway that exists in relation to a broader public feed. I don't know if that's true for every religious organization. Probably true for a lot of them, the ones that start small. I am not a religious scholar, so I couldn't really say, but this sense of like defining, I mean, if I think about sort of like the fragmenting and splintering of religious dominations into smaller sects, um, there's probably something there around similarly to sort of like the mimetic tribes or something of you're trying to cohere a sense of identity by defining yourself even more narrowly um uh and then of course all the tribal warfare between between sects and denominations probably has some relevance here. But
And this question from Clayton, what a great question. Clayton clearly should have been an editor in this book. It would have been even better. He says, what makes up a personal mimetic immune system? Yeah. Critical
whoa.
thinking, skepticism, scientific method, literacy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
I love all this. There's probably, my first reaction is there's also like a, I think this struggle in how to manage the flow of information on social platforms in particular comes from not being able to draw a clear line between when is it my personal responsibility to, be more skeptical, be a critical thinker, whatever, just versus like what is the responsibility of sort of like the collective immune system or the environment I'm situated in? Like, is it the responsibility of a platform to try to help me out with that, or can I be trusted to do it on my own? And I think there's a lot of parallels here with, um, like personal nutrition, any other sort of like public health question, public policy when it comes to managing health, because there's this balance between like your own personal decisions and your own responsibility around protecting yourself versus if not, not everyone's going to do that, but it can still infect or harm the rest of the group. Like, what steps should we take as a collective to try to manage that? So, very tricky questions, but um, yeah, I mean, the chapter about attention in the book, I think, is basically trying to address this of attention as the currency of everyone. I mean, yeah, I am sort of, I think, and I love the internet. I love all things about the but I truly believe that we are just like so distracted right now. I know that makes me sound like a grumpy Luddite, but uh, I think if we really still underestimate what we can do if we harness our attention and direct it towards the things that we care about. Um, so yeah, I think that falls into the realm of maybe like building up your own personal immunity. But like there is like a collective immunity that we are developing. And I talk about this in the Antimemetics book as well of the when we were first just being super overexposed to every possible idea out there and it was really unfiltered, everyone's kind of like going crazy, right? Like it's just like too many things to process, too many things to look at, too many things to get angry and upset about. And I think we are like we're in a very different place right now than we were 5 years ago. Like I think people are slowly starting to be a little bit like, okay, that's bait. That's clickbait, that's rage bait, whatever. I can kind of put that on mine and ignore it. Not everyone can do this, but more and more people are doing it. So I think there is. some level of both personal and collective immunity that is starting to form and happen. Um, so
You're not gonna Prada poke me again, just that once. Are you gonna fool me? I love this question from Hassan. I feel like it builds on what some of you were talking about. The second point he says, do anti-memes have an internal substructure that makes them anti-mimetic? In the book, it often seems anti-mimesis is externally opposed or a temporary interest. And as I was thinking about this, and I was asking myself this question, I thought, well, yeah, if it's like everyone hates Nadia, it's like you don't tell Nadia as a part of how you make
take a
the
random example.
anti, yeah, just take a random top of my tongue. But no, how do you, what's your answer to that question?
Uh, sorry, I got distracted there. Can you repeat
Do
that
they have an
part of the
internal?
question?
Do anti-memes have an internal substructure that makes them anti-mimetic? Is there something that's like, hi, don't tell,
Yeah.
only tell privately, not publicly, or something like that?
Yeah, this is I think I was touching on earlier of I've gotten some version of this question a lot of people have been curious about so far in reading the book. Um, I think anti-memes have some innate qualities that might make them more or less predisposed to being anti-mimetic in the same way that with super memes, it's like, oh, it's something that, is typically apocalyptic in nature, speaks to our personal value. You can identify some of these characteristics of, this is the type of idea that is highly consequential and like, might make it more likely to be anti-mimetic. But I think between the two, I would place much higher relevance on the network that it's situated in, because ultimately it has to decide whether it's going to spread from person to person. And so that really comes down to what are the types of people or the nodes that are situated in a network. You can message an anti-meme in different ways to make it spread more easily. Also true of memes, of course. So there are, ways to work around it to make an anti-mimetic idea more mimetic. But fundamentally, I think even just encountering that sort of resistance or whether it encounters resistance has more to do with who is receiving the idea, because there are ideas that spread perfectly easily in certain networks and that you can't, that don't spread so easily in other ones. I'm sure everyone has this experience of, I mean, yeah, you go to Thanksgiving dinner with your parents or something. I don't know. It's like there are things you can say to a certain group of friends that you can't say to another group and things like that. Like that in itself is sort of the anti-mimetic properties at work.
I'm going to we'll say three more questions. There are so many more great ones, but I'm going to protect Nadia's time. And I love this like deep true fan here question from Angad, who says, would the book have been possible without your Jana experience? The quantum book might not have been enough in itself, right? So why don't you speak about
Yeah,
a little bit about the Jana experience?
that's
Yeah, what a great question.
yeah, so right around, let's see, it was maybe a couple months before, or no, it was really like right around the same time I think that we decided to do this book. Um, I yeah, I'll try to keep this super brief, but I sort of stumbled into this world of a style of what's called advanced meditation, where people can engender these intensely altered, deep psychedelic-like states using only meditation, which sounded too fantastical to be true. I had no background in meditation, but I wanted to write a piece about other people who were interested in this topic. As part of that research, I ended up trying it myself and was sort of like just shocked by what I experienced. And now I'm now spending a bunch of time just trying to understand like what the heck is this thing, and how does it work? What is the impact, potential for positive impact on people's mental health and things like that. So um, I mean, it's hard to say one or the other. They definitely kind of came around the same time of, I think, stumbling into that world of advanced meditation was one of the more challenging things that I've come across, because I so didn't want it to be my thing. Like I didn't want to be coded as someone who's into like, meditation or something like that. And I was just like, man, I really, really don't want this to be my thing. But like, unfortunately, it has now grabbed my attention and now I cannot let it go. So I guess this is my life now. And maybe in a similar way with this book, it felt like it's just there's a little bit of this like inevitability to it, where it's like, well, Yancey's putting out this call and I do have this mess of notes that is sitting on my desktop, and I gotta do it. So I think that's what I mean about like I think lack of freedom can itself be liberating, where to me, it just, if I know I have this feeling in my body and my brain, it's just like, I just got to do the thing. I can't not. So yeah, I think they're not obviously related in my mind, but they definitely both came up around the same time and maybe made me more open to just, well, you got to do the thing that you got to do. And I do talk about a little bit in the book as well.
All right, I'm going to combine two other questions, and then I'm going to give myself the last question because I think there's one last thing to talk about. But I like these related ones from sorry, scrolling up here. Um, ARR asks, do you see anti-memes emerge in some cases as a response to dogma? In other words, there's a threat to an established dogma that emerges, and so it sort of pushes that threat into an anti-meme. And I want to connect that with this other similar of is there a relationship between super memes and anti-memes? So there's a theory in psychology that aspects of our shadows serve to protect the ego from the truths it can't accept. So
Ugh. Yes, good
there's
stuff.
something in
Okay.
there. Yeah.
Um, remind me the first part of the question because as anyone who's read the
It
book yet,
was
I have a
like,
terrible memory.
is it, yes, our anti-memes a response to dogma?
Yeah. I think maybe not. I think of them maybe less as like a direct response in the reactionary sense and more of parallel ecosystem. And in a funny way, there are also dogmatic systems that have incorporated anti-memes as part of in almost this like formalized ceremonial way, which I also talk about in the book. So, the idea of going to see a priest to do your confessions, this exists in a, a very clearly defined system of how you're supposed to bring that sort of knowledge to light. And the things you're confessing to someone in a confessional booth are anti-mimetic in nature. They're things that you can't say out loud. You can only say it in this private confines. You might even say things that you were afraid to even admit to yourself, but you can do it in this very structured context. But it's sort of been incorporated as like a feature of the greater system where we say, here is the box, literally the box where anti-mimetic things happen. And then outside here, we don't really, deal with that. And I have another example from a more like secular context in the book where I talk about this role of like an interesting person, which is a term that's Catherine Boyle had coined about, why do big corporations hire like a McKinsey consultant or something like that? And it's often they're not necessarily always unearthing something radically new, but they exist there to say the thing that no one who works at the company can say because they're going to get fired, they're going to be ostracized, whatever. But they say, oh no, it's this third party consultant who said the thing, like now we can all talk about it because now we have a formal report, right? So it's just funny to think about like, yes, I think they exist they coexist with dogma, but are not always like a reaction against them. And then what was the second part of
That was fine.
this is good, okay.
That. Yeah, yeah. Well, it was like the shadow. I mean, you sort of touch on it a little bit, but is there a shadow? Are super memes and anti memes like shadow ego of each other? And maybe let me ask the last question because I think it will speak to that. But like the in the book, you close with unexpected hero, hero lowercase, but an archetype where you ultimately sort of present anti-memetics, anti-memes as bureaucracies of some kind, whether literal or not. And you talk about how Robert Moses acted in relationship to bureaucracies. And so maybe speak to what compelled you to close with that, and maybe that speaks to some of these other questions.
Sure. Yeah. I love that the Robert Moses thing was like so titillating for like the New York crowd because like to me he's like genuinely like a great but like yeah somehow has a roused some opinions there. But I do want to touch briefly on the anti-memes and super memes relationship, just because I think like the motives for pursuing pursuing a super meme can themselves be anti-mimetic or suppressed in a way. So, why? Like, I think a lot of people take super memes at face value, myself included, right? Like, I mean, you really convince yourself that this is a thing, this is a crisis you should really, really care about. And by the way, like, I think again, we have this sort of intrinsic desire to want to dedicate ourselves to a cause. So I don't think we should even talk ourselves out of dedicating ourselves to a cause. Like, it's great, whatever. Find a cause you believe in and go to town. But I think because super memes are so closely tied to like your own personal value system in terms of what resonates. So, why do people care so much about population decline or something? It's like, well, what are your thoughts on fertility and families and things like that? That, their motives for being drawn to a particular super meme might not even be revealed to themselves because they may not even make that sort of connection. And then yeah, on the Robert Moses front, anything in particular, just like talking about the like bureaucracy
Well,
aspect there.
I'm on like page 900 of the Power Broker as we speak. But the book has such a great culmination in the end. You point to like look at someone like Moses who defeated the made his own bureaucracy, but or like moves willfully cutting through a bureaucracy, and in that way is acting as the truth teller, as as the oppositional force.
I wanted to end the book on a powerful or empowering kind of note. I think there's a way to have written this book that would have made anti-memes feel shadowy and transgressive and forbidden. I know we talked about this a lot with the book cover design too, where it's like, I don't want it to feel scary or censored. I want it to feel intriguing. Um, and yeah, I didn't want to write a book that felt like the outside world is dangerous and we ha only have this anti-mimetic world to like hunker down in safety in and whatever. I really wanted to just sort of lay out this sort of descriptive version of an alternate universe and then say, given all that, like, what can we do with this? And that was important to me. Because I think, again, me working out this book as therapy for myself, it's like I want to feel like I am not just destined to this, sad world where I can't say the things I want to say in public. Like, how do I think about continuing to make an impact in the world and do things that I'm proud of, given that these dynamics exist. And so, yeah, I mean, like Robert, you said you have to look at the FDR every day. It's like, there's an entire monument of that is a testament to Robert Moses' power, right? And he accomplished a lot of these things through more anti-mimetic memes. He's the person that, we would have otherwise never heard about if Robert Caro had not written a book about him, right? He was the bureaucrat that had never been elected, never held public office, but just like got things done in the background. And so I don't want people to come away feeling like, oh, the mimetic city is the fun one and anti-mimetics is kind of like the private one where you don't really get anything done. Like I want to present a version of it where it's like, you can do a lot of things if you just sort of pay attention to the stuff that no one else is paying attention to and just dedicate enough time and resources to it.
Just like you've done making this book, Nadia. It's great. It's great. And thank you for this conversation and for our friendship and our collaboration. It's super fun. Really enjoy it. And love everyone hanging out. The chat has been excellent. Super. I've learned like I want volume two, just like on the chat fork of all these different things that came up. Incredibly appreciated. Dark Forest scene is a real ones. So lots more to get into together. And yeah, just thank you all. So much fun. We'll end up posting this on YouTube and sharing it within the community. But yeah, Nadia, thank you for your time and this great book. And folks, this will be showing up if you ordered a physical, it'll be showing up in your mailbox by the end of this week. Knock on wood. All right.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you all.